communities have become a super tool for business of all sizes. These provide a space for customers, employees, and stakeholders to connect and collaborate effectively. And to witness this growth, we need to select a right community platform. Hello, everyone. I am Shaveta Sharma, Delivery Manager and Community Consultant at Grazitti Interactive. With me today, I have Todd Nilson and Richard Millington to provide an insight on unlocking growth by harnessing the power of online community. Richard and Todd, welcome to this event, to this webinar. We are so happy to have you here. So feel free to introduce. All of us knows you very well, but yeah, formally, yes.
Sure, I'll do age before beauty and introduce myself. Thank you so much for being a gracious host here, Shaveta and to Grazitti. I'm Todd Nilson, the founder of Clock Tower Advisors. I do community strategy for organizations, primarily in the B2C and nonprofit space. Also do some digital workplace strategies as well. And really pleased to be here today and to be talking to my friend and colleague, Richard. I don't think we've been on screen together for a while.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, and thanks for that, Todd. Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Millington, the founder of Feverbee. I've been running Feverbee since 2008, I think, which feels like an incredibly long time now. I'm actually at that point of events now. When I first began going to these events, I was the youngest person in the room, and now I go to events, I'm like, don't really like where this is going. Anyway, like Todd, we do community strategy consultancy, a lot of B2B, a lot of tech brands, a lot of other stuff. You can find out more on feverbee.com.
Yeah. Okay. Before we get started, I will request the attendees. Oh, okay. Before I get started, I would request the attendees to drop their questions in Q&A or the chat section. Todd, let's get started with you. According to you, what organization should consider when they are selecting a community platform?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I think there are a number of considerations when an organization has decided that they think they want to have a community platform, and the big one is really, do you really need one in the first place? I mean, I think as we kind of see the developments over the past couple of years and all of the different interactions that take place on social platforms, an organization may have the things that they need. If they may have their sense of community, living on some more conventional social media spaces, and I'm sure Rich will probably want to say a few more words about this as well. But answering that question up front, like who are you really trying to reach? Why would they need an independent community platform in the first place? These are all big questions, and I think as an organization starts to go down that road of thinking about making that kind of choice, there are decisions to be made around the technology side, certainly, but also the operations side, which I see often gets neglected in the process. Have you thought about your community management team? Have you got data and analysis professionals who are available? Do you have a tech team that's going to be prepared to support the platform over time? There's overhead for these platforms, particularly the large enterprise ones that require a lot of integrations, with other systems, your CRMs, your learning systems, and all of those questions are things that probably need to be addressed in short order. And the outcomes that you're seeking from those members need to really guide your choice in that process. I'll pause there. I don't know if Richard, if you wanted to chime in on that as well, but it's a huge question, and I think we could probably spend the entire time just talking about that particular piece.
Yeah, I can chime in if you want. I don't know if you want to continue or not. I know that this was a question for Todd, so it's up to you.
Yeah, Richard, feel free to jump in. We would love to hear from you. So
having a conversation. So yeah.
Sure. I mean, as I've written about a lot recently, I feel like community platforms are always going to have an important role to play in a lot of communities that are out there. And I think if you need that forum-centric community experience where every post creates a new page and that's indexed on search engines and it's easy to find, then a lot of the modern platforms are relatively similar to one another. I mean, there's differences between them, but the actual experience is more or less similar between the top 5 platforms or so. I think when you're deciding which one to choose, well, first you have to decide, like Todd was saying, is that the right approach for you? We're entering an era now where we're seeing more and more communities that don't need that central platform experience because they're not just about Q&A. Like Q&A, it makes a lot of sense. If you ask a question, get a response, it makes sense. But more and more, they need places where people already gather and engage. More and more people are turning to Slack groups or Discord or other channels that offer this different mentality when you go there. And I think there's a danger that a lot of us are defaulting to strategies that are pushed by platform vendors rather than leading or letting our members or audiences lead the way. And I also think if you're on a platform already and you're moving, that I always feel moving should be a last resort. Because it's so costly, it's so expensive. It's like moving house, but worse, I think. And you often have one set of problems that you fix, but then have another set of problems as a result. So what I would recommend is do UX research with your audience first. Like actually have them test experiences on one platform versus another. You can see existing communities and examples out there of both, and you'll find out which they prefer. And often you'll find out there isn't much of a difference. 2, I think another good reason to change is if your legal or accounting department tells you to. Legal, there's some platforms that don't abide by modern data security practices at the moment, so you might just be forced to change. That's happened with 1 or 2 of our clients. And another is, you're coming to the end of the contract with that platform. The budget's really high. It's, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. That's a reason to change. I think another reason to change is if member preferences have changed, like we've talked about already. If fewer and fewer people are using your platform, it's probably not just because you're using Chorus instead of Insight or Gainsight. It's probably there's a more fundamental issue that you have to tackle here. And finally, I think if the organization behind the platform isn't supporting that platform or isn't supporting you. So Salesforce, I think, is a classic example of this. It's kind of an abandoned platform at this point. So you can use it if you absolutely have to, but it's probably better if you don't. So I think those are the things that we kind of think about on whether we should change platform, what category of platform we change to, then specifically what platform within that we're going to select.
I think that platform change is an interesting one, like when, knowing when to switch. And, another of the big questions for me is, with so many new entrants in the community platform space over the past couple of years, I mean, there are a lot that have just kind of sprung up like mushrooms all over the place that are, very special built, for what they do. I often wonder about like what is their financial stability over time? Is there a good model there? Are they, a couple of the red flags for me is if the response times for trouble tickets are taking way too long, if you have trouble getting your data out of the system and what kind of format you're getting that data in, if you're finding like the API is breaking, there's a host of things that can happen, especially with like I appreciate the scrappy, innovative startup atmosphere of some of the community platforms that have come on the scene in recent years, but I'm also anxious about their stability and kind of what they get over time.
Totally.
Yeah, I think the financial side is interesting as well there, because I remember talking to Joe Cottrell like years ago, who we both know, and asked him, why is Chorus so expensive? I mean, it's not that much better than V Bulletin, like it has extra functionality. And I remember him saying something really interesting. Like he said, you want it to be expensive because if it was cheap, the business wouldn't be sustainable. And I think there's something to do that. Yes, there's a lot that Chorus brings into it and the other platforms bring into it. But I do think when there's a new platform that emerges that is just cheaper than what else is out there, I worry about that. I worry about the sustainability of the business model behind that. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, Richard, go ahead. So I was saying, truly agree on that, because these days when we are selecting or searching for a lot of community platforms, we are finding that you find one, you'll get a list of 20. And you're like, okay, if you go and check the back end of them, all look similar. And it's like too confusing, like which ones to select. So totally agree on you. Okay, Todd, you want to add anything else on this?
No, I think let's move on, and I'm sure we'll probably come back to some of these issues again through the conversation.
Yeah, definitely we will. Okay, Richard, how do you nurture a relationship in the community to encourage the participation and collaboration among the members?
I think there might be two separate questions there. And the first one is, how do you nurture relationships? And I think the answer to that is to begin by imagining environments which are quite nurturing in the first place. I mean, the way we typically think about it is you can try and force it, but I often find these efforts to try and force people to get to know each other with these like icebreaker questions and all that. I think it has good intentions, but it often feels quite cringe-worthy to me. It feels like, comes across as very patronizing, and in a lot of environments, it's just inappropriate. You know, if you're managing a community for like senior executives, and you're like, what type of furniture would you be and why? I feel like there's a problem there, right? And so I think the environments that tend to really build relationships and really facilitate collaboration between individuals are one is where there are people that have problems and there are people that can solve them. And I think what your role is in those kind of environments is to make a list of problems that people want to solve, which you can easily put together from surveys, interviews, asking members to tell what they need. And then you can make a list of problems that people can solve with the assets and the expertise and the knowledge that they have. And then you can play this great role of just matching the two. But you don't have to try and force it. It doesn't have to come across as fake or inauthentic. You don't have to be that, you know, person that's drunk too many coffees like this morning. You can be like a very genuine person, because I think the environments that really do nurture these is a way you feel you're with a group of like-minded others that have the same goals as what you have, that have the same maybe levels of experience or ideas as you have. And then you provide this great role of giving them tools and resources to overcome their challenges and achieve their goals. It makes it different in support communities. It's a little bit different because people have questions and there's a different kind of dynamic. But outside of that use case, like, I do feel like there's another approach of going about this. Todd, please.
Really well said, obviously, but you know, I kind of look at some of the systemic things with particularly a community platform as well. You know, are we signaling when somebody's even coming into that platform that this is a safe, you know, contemporary web experience? You know, here, does it feel secure? Do I feel like it's a you know, a well thought through space where there are clear signposts about where to go? And I think that kind of speaks to what Richard's talking about with that you know, is it a nurturing environment? You know, and as I kind of think about you know, the kinds of places where communities are likely to be born and thrive in online or in digital spaces, you know, not all of those spaces are created equal. Your community may not be best suited by living on TikTok, for example. That might be the equivalent of meeting in a convenience store parking lot, you know, for your people, rather than having a meeting hall that's dedicated, you know, and purpose built, you know, for that reason. And so I tend to think about those community spaces and what makes for nurturing relationships by what are the parameters you're setting up, you know, in that space. And I tend to think in the metaphor of like neighborhoods and physical spaces, and what kinds of places are most welcoming that way. I also like, you know, one of the things, you know, Richard said in one of his recent videos was around don't overly control or try to structure or suffocate the interactions. I mean, I think that's a super important point to think about as well. But as far as, you know, things outside of just sort of the platform structure itself and being really transparent about your reasons for running the community and you know, what reasonable expectation others have in that space of the benevolence of others who go into that area, it really has to do with, you know, responding warmly, putting people in connection with each other, and in as much as the community platform supports those kind of communications, both public and private, I think those are key things to think about.
Great. That's like, there are like big discussion that could go on with these questions, like what we can do to encourage the participations. So yeah. Okay, this is like question for both of you. So both of you are strategists. So just a question like, what are some of the strategies to scale and amplify the community engagement? It's like a big question in itself, but yeah, we'd like to hear from both of you, like, what do you think about it? How to scale and amplify the community engagement?
You want me to go first? I assume that's a yes. So how to scale and amplify engagement? I mean, I think the cliche as a consultant is that you answer a question with a question, and I'm going to do that here, which is, why do you want to scale and amplify engagement? Like, it's not necessarily a good or bad goal. I just feel like it's the default option and doesn't always have to be. And obviously, like, organizations want the community to be as big as possible because of the metrics and all those things. But if you think of any group that you're a part of, a group that you enjoy being a part of, you never usually wish it was bigger. You usually wish it was better or tighter or had deeper levels of trust, or, you know, was achieving better results or had better collaboration with each other. So I think there's a couple of interesting threads to look at here. One is that I think it really depends on what we mean by community. Like, I think, like many people here, there's so many different interpretations of community that I feel we might need to be more precise. And the way we usually break it down is that there's communities in the sense that they are support channels, like scale support channels that you see a lot with the major tech brands. There's success communities where people are proactively sharing expertise, like communities of practice. There's the advocacy groups that are more like the cult fans and the cult brands. And then I think we've got peer groups and user groups. And the principles that apply to each are very different. The things that work in a user group or peer group are very different from a support community. And if it's a group of peers, then you probably don't want it to grow that much bigger. You're probably happy. You probably want that smallness as part of the benefit of being a part of that group. So I think the first question is, why do you want to scale and amplify the community? But let's assume you do, because I think that's the premise of the question here, and I don't want to be annoying. I think there's a couple of things that I think are relevant here. One is, if you want to reach a critical mass of activity, if you're just getting started, then I do think there are a couple of things that have to be in place. One is that promotional plan has to be very strong. Initially, there's direct invitations that go out to your members. You have to make sure the community is in the referral flow and integrated with the product as closely as possible. You have to look at what the journey of that customer is, or what that audience member is, and figure out where are they going to stumble or see upon the community. Where's that interruption point in their regular flow that's suddenly going to divert them to the community instead? I think that's going to be quite a critical thing. So direct invites, search traffic, optimizing for search is still quite important, but becoming harder every single day. But I would look to be putting the community on homepage placements. Related articles actually are being very successful. Putting links to the community and asking a question next to related articles. I think Apple actually do this incredibly well. So if you look at a lot of the documentation on Apple, why doesn't my iPhone work? There's an option there to ask the community if you don't get the answer, or to ask questions about that topic. That tends to work incredibly well. And I think the other thing I'll mention is just the positioning of the community. Like, if it's not gaining enough traction, if it's not getting enough activity, then positioning the community is key. Like, why would someone come to your community instead of just contacting the customer support line? That's a genuine challenge. Or why would they come to your community instead of like a subreddit where it might already be a lot of activity and engagement and without the rules that you're going to have in your community? So I think the positioning of the community is an important thing to look at as well. Anyway, I've been speaking for a while. Todd, please jump in.
No, fantastic. Yeah. So I had a couple of things going through my mind as we were doing this. So I'm a bit of a documentation fanatic, and so I'm a big believer in having a well-documented charter or plan, for the community, and sort of what direction you want it to go over time, and sort of how it's going to scale, and the kinds of activities that you want to see within the space. And a part of that, so like I was trying to pull apart, as Richard was saying, as a consultant, we ask a question and, in answer to a question, a lot of times. My initial question about this was, do you mean strategies or are you talking about tactics, things to do? When I think about strategies, that's how am I going to win? How am I going to achieve the objective? And the tactics are going to be the specific steps, the actions that I'm taking to get there. And there's a little bit of splitting hairs around definitions from strategist to strategist that you may talk to, but I think we're all in general agreement about that approach. As I think about that scaling engagement and amplifying engagement, maybe our strategy is to do that by creating options or situations for intimacy to occur in those spaces. And that might mean something like convening some small cohort groups as they come into a space, or having some Ask Me Anything sessions where you can start to build some one-on-one relationships, where there's not that sense of overwhelm of, wow, there's 50,000 people in this community, or there's 1.5 million people in this community. How do I get to know others in this space? And that generally doesn't happen until people can kind of see, like, who can I interact with at some level of scale here? And I think that those kinds of wins occur when people start to see opportunities for friendship in the space. People stick around for their friends. They don't necessarily stick around for the solution to your discussion question and what's there. So I think a lot about that. And then, some of the more typical kinds of tactics, like having events or mixers for people to get together. But really, I also come back to having some regular kind of rituals within the community, things that happen on a regular basis, give people comfort about some kind of social structure that underlines a promise that the community has for others. And those kinds of things can really serve to help people feel more comfortable in the space, less sense of friction about starting to participate in meaningful ways, and really kind of help scale and engage like your question suggests.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight, Todd. And yeah, totally believe that if people are coming for the community, they will come back if they find the friendship, they find the belongingness. So definitely, that could be a strong point here. Okay, so again, this is not specific to any of you guys. Anyone can jump in and start the conversation. Can you share some practical strategies for leveraging the online community platform to drive loyalty and achieve long-term success? I know it is a continuation to the first question, like how to engage, but yeah, it's more on the loyalty, brand, and long-term success for the community.
Shall I go first? Okay, you have to go first on the next one.
You got it.
I got this. Relax. I think it's an interesting question because the relationship between community loyalty and brand loyalty is interesting. And honestly, no one has any real idea which direction it runs. Like, there's a lot of correlation that's out there and data you can find out there, but there's very few actual studies where they, withheld from one group and they exposed another group to the community and looked at the results. There's very, very few studies that are like that. And so we often don't have data that suggests, do more loyal customers become loyal members, or does membership increase loyalty? And I think that's a shame, because it means that people haven't really worked backwards to figure out what are the specific things in a community that would drive that loyalty, because there isn't enough data. So I would say that simply having people active in a community doesn't increase their loyalty. I think there's specific things they have to do within that community. And so it's not just a number of posts that they make. It's not just a number of contributions or things they share or likes or any of that. I think there's very specific things that make a difference. And these are the things that change their attitude towards the brand. And so I think there's a couple of very specific points that increase loyalty quite specifically. And we'll think of this as churn as well. So one of the absolutely most powerful places where community helps is in that initial trial period of a product or a service, like that 3 months or 30 days or whatever. This is when the majority of people will cancel their service because they're not paying for it yet. It's when they are being overwhelmed by all of the information and knowledge that's out there. And so this is one of the most powerful places where having a place to go and ask for help is critically important. And they don't want to contact customer support just to find out where an option is to click. And so a community here is really powerful. And I think it's the most underused place at the moment. And we've done 1 or 2 studies and had some work with clients where if you take customers that are new and you put them into a group for people that are new to the product, not to the community, but are new to the product, and have them go through a cohort together, that is incredibly effective at increasing their retention rate. So people think of retention as like people that have been customers for a long time already. I would posit that the people right at the beginning, that's where you can have a really, really big impact. So I would focus a lot of effort there, because I feel like very often we're focusing on the wrong end of the spectrum. A couple of other things I think are interesting to look at is, one is through the community, does the product appear easier to use? Like when we measure loyalty, there's lots of things you can measure, but I think attitude change in certain areas is really useful. So ease of use, perceived value, time to value, creating your first like instance of whatever that product or that service is important. Other things that are really useful are reviews and testimonies from other members. Like communities are this incredibly powerful eternal spring of new reviews and testimonials and case studies that we're just ignoring. It just kind of like washes away because we don't capture it at the right time. And I think community is a very powerful tool if you can capture those things. And another thing which is really important is perceived value against competitors. Like the more people see comments from people in that community that are comparing your product to another, and you're just coming out favorably there, that is going to increase retention as well. So to sum up, it's not just a level of activity. Just more engagement doesn't necessarily increase brand loyalty at all, but there's some very specific points and things that you can focus on that are really going to maximize this. So if you focus on those things, that's where I think you'll have the best results.
There are a couple of customers and companies that I've talked to recently where that sort of that early stage opportunity to establish loyalty really kind of came through in their journey, where they were pointing to community as a way to get those new customers over the first hurdle of using the product for the first time, creating that first first item, or building something useful out of it, because that's where the biggest drop off is, and that's where there's some huge gain to be had from helping people through. And I really like that cohort idea. I think that goes along with what I was saying earlier around having some of those small groups to create that greater sense of intimacy and being on the same journey together. I think that's really powerful. Some of the other things, from a platform perspective that communities can do to maybe help increase that sense of loyalty or stickiness, for an organization, are some things like having a best of section within the community. What are some of the all-time great responses that go in there? Frequently asked questions, things that come up again and again, as support areas, but also like how to make the most of the product or service, or whatever it happens to be. Other things like and these are ego-driven kind of things, but providing community spotlights for great customers or individuals within the space, providing badges or credentialing that shows up for people that answer a lot of questions, in the space. All of these things indirectly, I think, can affect a sense of loyalty or retention within the product. But again, that sense of I've joined this community, I've made contributions, and as a result of that, those are being reflected back to me. That I'm being recognized, I'm being seen for some of the things that I'm giving and doing in the space. Those kinds of things are great. Special access to new product tryouts, betas, sort of the equivalent of, the community becomes the backstage pass to understand, some things that are happening for the organization, and hopefully excite those individuals so that they want to blog about them, write about them, put it out into the broader digital sphere about what's available.
Okay, great. A lot of insights on brand and loyalty, and we totally agree on that. There are users who are in the community from the day the community has started, and giving them that super user thing and that spotlight would really help and appreciate them. So yes, they are the brand ambassador for the communities for future. So definitely. Okay. So I think we have a lot of questions coming up. But before we take up those questions, I would like to know, we are looking, today we are seeing a lot of customers are planning to switch the communities platform, right? So my question is also somewhat related to on the same lines. When should a brand decide to switch to new community platform? And what are the key factors that should be considered? I know we have already touched it in the beginning, but yeah, I think so this could be a detailed discussion on, because this is something that's running in a lot of customers' heads that, okay, I want to switch my community platform. I'm looking for new platform. So let's start on that.
So, well, as promised, I'll take this one on first, and then we can kind of come back to it. So I'll probably overlap with some of the things that we talked about a little earlier with this, but I think when there's questions of degraded performance within the community, downtimes, those are of course immediate flags, and issues when it's time to move. If the company itself seems to be in trouble, if they missed a round of funding as a startup, those are certainly areas of concern for me. If the feature releases seem to be coming slower, if the product roadmap never seems to have anything come to fruition, those are concerns. Slow responses to help requests, those are big too. One of the items, and Adrian Spare, our mutual friend, has talked about this from time to time, is like, what kind of format can you get a data export in? If it's not, maybe, it's worth asking upfront, what formats those things come in, because those data migrations are incredibly hard. If you're trying to pull community data out of one system and put it into another, it doesn't always work great. I know when I was doing that work back with 7 Summits back in the day, when we were doing data migrations, we were including hundreds of extra hours in a project plan for that, just because it required multiple loads of data to see how things show up, to make sure that discussions are being attributed to the right people. There are huge concerns around making sure that those things work. But the bigger drivers around this are going to be, has the membership composition changed? Have their expectations about like how to interact changed? Maybe you've been living on a discussion forum all these years, but you now have a progressively younger demographic that's using the platform, and they want a more Discord-like experience, or they're more likely to interact with each other on a WhatsApp, or a Telegram space. Those are definite considerations to think about making a move, and they're not small either. I mean, I think it's maybe worth making some bets on pilots and doing a little bit of experimenting and pivoting as needed, based on some of the things that you start to see. But those use cases can do and should change over time. If the community is not really sustaining or thriving over a period of time, if you see degradation or even calcification of the kinds of interactions that are happening in the space, it's maybe time to think about, perhaps we need a change.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all of that. I think I can rephrase what I said before, because I think the way I think about it is, every platform has issues. There isn't a perfect platform that's out there. I've been doing like some YouTube reviews of them, if someone wants to put that link in the comment. And with like pros and cons and all those things. If you're deciding to change, like, you're setting yourself up for a very difficult time. Like, it could be up to a year of almost full-time work to really get this right. Like, it's a huge lift. And so I would make a list of the issues that are bothering you about the platform you're on. And then I would rank them as either showstoppers, where you absolutely have to change or close the community down. Severe, where it's causing a big pain, and that pain might be so much that you should move. And then those that are inconvenient, and those that you might be able to work with, but it's not worth dealing with. And I think if there's one showstopper, then obviously you have to move. If there's 2 severe ones, then you have to really consider it and probably move then. But it's inconvenient ones that I wouldn't worry about. So showstoppers to me, I think I can think of 2. One is the legal side. if your platform isn't abiding by the legal or data security principles of the of your organization, you have to move. There's no discussion about it. You're just going to be forced to move, or you're going to be forced to shut the community down. The other severe one are the financial side. Like if you just can't afford it, you either have to shut the community down or move. So I think those are the two showstoppers that come to mind. Maybe there's more if someone wants to guess in chat. Severe is where I think we start thinking about the support experience. How is the platform supported? Like a lot of Salesforce communities have a lot of severe issues, but they're not showstopper issues. Not yet. They might be at some point. So severe issues would be like your personal interaction with the platform, whether the preferences of members have really seriously changed. So I think if you've got two of them, then yeah, there's probably worth considering moving. And then there's things that are inconvenient. I feel like the data side, like that's probably more of an inconvenience. You can live with them, but it's just taking a lot of time. And so if there's a lot of inconvenient issues, then you might want to consider it. But I really would think about it as showstopper, severe, or inconvenient, and don't move like just because of a few inconveniences or one severe issue. Like it really has to be something major if you're going to make that migration. The more interesting question perhaps is, if you had to move, where would you migrate to? Because I feel at the moment all of the platforms are in a very interesting space. Yeah, I don't know, Todd, if you want to jump in here or not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely see some of the enterprise players busily working to legacy players really busily working to reinvent themselves or to create younger, sexier versions of their platforms at this point, and probably with a lower price point. And I don't know that race to the bottom is good for everybody, you know, where we are these days. So yeah, I don't know that I could add anything more, you know, to that, but I think that there's more competition than ever for deciding what kind of platform, you know, to go to at this point. You don't think so?
I feel like there's less competition than what there used to be because of the acquisitions. I feel like I actually feel like the enterprise sector. And sorry to, I mean, I guess it's okay to.
No. And so enterprise sector, I totally agree with you. I think there's.
You mean yeah? Okay, yeah. Oh yeah, there's a lot of like yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're looking at sort of like creator, influencer driven kinds of community platforms that are out there, I mean, they've just kind of mushroomed up, you know, over time. The mid-range to large enterprise software market seems like it's really attenuated just a couple of players now, and that I think we're in violent agreement about that. Yeah.
I feel like with like the enterprise side, I mean, all of the platforms have their advantages. I feel like Chorus is probably still just about the best customer support experience, but with Aurora, it's interesting to see what all of these big clients of theirs with their customizations are going to do. Because I don't think that Aurora is ready for that at all at this point, and I'm not sure how it's going to work out. I feel Insided or Gainsight as is now, I know what they want to be. And I think they've got a very robust platform that's not very flexible, but it does what it does well. I think if you can integrate it with Gainsight, there could be an advantage there. Vanilla, I'm not as positive about as well I used to be. I feel like, yeah, I don't feel their platform can compete well at the price point of the other ones. Who else is there? Verin, very flexible, but very difficult to actually like set up and use, and you're going to need like an implementation partner like Grazitti, or who else is there, Four Roads or Social Edge or one of those firms to do it. Who else is there? Like I can't think who else is in the space. Discourse,
maybe Hivebright, Discourse, right. I
don't see Hivebright like that much. Like Hivebright are interesting. I feel like they're very good at a narrow range of communities, and I'm worried that they're trying to expand into a space where they don't have the advantage they have in the alumni space. Discourse, I think, are the last independent platform that's out there. I feel like they're kind of like Verin in a way, very flexible, very customizable, but not the easiest platform to use. So yeah, I don't know. Like I'm curious to get what you think as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the only one that I would also think to add to that, not just vanilla, but their acquisition or the vice versa, with higher logic as well, and so they've been very focused on the association space, trying to be a little bit more than that, but then they're kind of talking about vanilla as their more enterprise, focused approach to that, and then higher logic has its own. New version Thrive, which is out, which is sort of a light, from what I see, it's kind of a light version of that. Yeah, I wonder, so many of the enterprise platforms, Rich, what, are you experiencing, like, most of them don't seem to have a very good mobile experience, or they're struggling with having a good mobile experience. And I feel like that market needs to be served a little bit better in the enterprise world at this point.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I don't think anyone does great with mobile. I know like a bunch dabbled with apps a while ago. I think Discourse were doing apps for different communities for a while, but I don't think many people use the apps. No, I don't think anyone is doing great on mobile except the ones that were mobile first initially. So maybe Circle or someone like that might be doing well. I'm curious what
Disciple, they were designed almost sort of as a
Guild
mobile
as well.
first. Yeah, totally.
I'm curious about Better Mode or Tribe. Like I remember spending some time with them in Prague, and their ambition is interesting. Like I'm really curious to see where they go. But I just don't know if they're ready for like the big enterprise platforms with everything that's going to come with that. So we'll see. Yeah.
Totally. So a lot of questions coming on the same lines. So I think we should get started by picking few of the questions, and some questions are related to what we were discussing. You were discussing, Richard, about 5 of the main community platforms. So the question is, which one are those 5 community platforms?
Like which one?
The 5 top community platforms.
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Which are the 5 top community platform according to you in the market?
Oh, which are the 5 top? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Top. I mean, it depends how you define top. It's like asking what are the 5 best cars. Like, I mean, you can come up with a list. I would say the 5 most common that we see with the clients, and we, without meaning to be arrogant here, we tend to target the larger organizations with the work that we do. So I would say Chorus, Gainsight, or Insided, probably Vanilla, Discourse, and Virent. Those are probably the most common ones we see. Yeah, Discourse as well. I'd probably say like those 5.
Okay. So any particular reasons for it? Is there customer support or the customization level, or how are you going to?
So if the question is which is the best, then I think that question again is like asking what's the best car. I mean, there isn't one. What's the best place to go on vacation? It's more like what's the best for this company at this situation. Exactly. So I do think to go into more depth here, like if you're developing a customer support community, like a pure customer support community for telecom, then I would be looking at Chorus. I'd be looking at Insided, Vanilla, perhaps. Maybe Standing on Giants as well. They're kind of like a niche player, but niche. I mean, I think that's how you say it in the US. A niche player, but they're kind of interesting as well. If you go with the open source, then Flowum as well, actually really interesting. If you're looking for a broader experience, then it really depends exactly what you need and why. I think Discourse is very good for the flexibility. Virent is probably best for the security along with Salesforce, although I wouldn't go with Salesforce personally. But I think one of the things happening a lot is we've lost the battle. Like I feel like we as community professionals have lost the battle at times in what platform to pick. And it often comes down to the procurement team or what is the broader data security strategy that the company has. And sometimes you're told, oh, it has to be Salesforce because it integrates with our CRM or their data privacy and security is good, not because it's the best platform. And I hear more and more that people are using platforms that they don't want to use. And so I do feel we've lost the battle there. So I don't think there's a best platform. I think it really depends on the use case and what you need. Flexibility and securely, I think the Rint's great. If you want something that's more robust and easy to use, then I think that inside it is great. I mean, I feel like it really depends on where you're at and what you want to do. Todd, please jump in.
Yeah, no, I would add to that. So choosing a platform like Salesforce's Experience Cloud, if you're a Salesforce shop, if you're invested in that tech stack, yeah, you probably want to investigate it and look at it. I still think there are better solutions out there as well. I'm not in the cheerleader camp for that particular platform either. I think Gainsight's got a really nice user experience on the way that they're set up. And it seems like a lot of larger brands are using them. Chorus is still a powerhouse. If you want a lot of customizability, a lot of integrations with platforms, like they're a kind of a gold standard to look at. I've worked with some customers that have been doing some more custom build, bespoke, kinds of community platforms as well, and not just taking some of the off the rack, kind of opportunities that are out there in the space. And I've never really been a huge proponent of custom builds, because then you own all of the software overhead that's involved with that, and you can build exactly what you want, but then you've got this beast that you've got to feed, and that's probably not your core business, in the first place. But I think there are some compromises to that. I've seen some white label community products, sort of show up. I've seen what is the WordPress Buddy Boss, which was Buddy Press's I guess grown-up brother now or something. I've been involved with a couple of build outs for Buddy Boss kinds of platforms, and they've got their good and bad elements to them. That it's better than trying to build from scratch, and you've got the flexibility of building on WordPress, but it's also not an ideal user experience unless you've got a really good WordPress team to be able to do that work. So a lot of different choices that are out there to think about for somebody that's looking around. So yeah, best platforms. Yeah.
What's your use case? So yeah, definitely agreed. So as per the use case and as per what your company requires and what is the demand, so the right platform would be according to that. So these are some of the questions. They are like they just need some. One of the question is, as per your experience, what are some of the points that need to be kept in mind while we are migrating a community to a new platform? So what are the pointers? Like obviously we have discussion when to migrate. When we think we can migrate to a new platform? But what are the points that need to be kept in mind while we are planning to migrate? So we have decided a platform. So is there some pointers that we need to keep in mind? We need to think, okay, these are the things that I need to migrate, and if you can add more to it.
Well, I mean, from a technical standpoint, do you want or need to take all of the legacy data from the community into a new platform experience? It's not just simply a lift and shift all the time. It's what elements of this are worth taking over? Like, are there some best posts? Are there some best conversations or best resources from your libraries that you want to move over? So it's not simply extracting all that data, but it's probably cleaning that data first and figuring out what you want to move over. Because otherwise, then you can end up with a really cluttered platform experience with data going back to 2000 and whatever, and it becomes really confusing, I think, for a user to maybe navigate that, especially if the data isn't moving over beautifully into that new space. Because I've seen plenty of situations where you're doing that kind of data migration, and guess what? Images got stripped out of the post, and suddenly, like, all of the context is gone from that conversation. There's a variety of things that can go wrong when we get down to that gods in the detail level of making a migration happen. But I've probably got into the technical solution too quickly. I don't know, Richard, if you get some higher level thoughts about that too.
No, I think, I think my biggest weakness, and you know this because like you worked with me, like back in 2014, is that I didn't go deep enough into the technical weeds. Like there were definitely times where I was like, okay, you migrate, like there's a migration button, like that you push. But the reality is, and the awakening for me over the last like nine years or so is, you've got to get into the weeds, because there are issues that you don't really understand until you get into the weeds. Because when there's two platforms, a lot of those data fields aren't going to match. There's going to be fields on one platform that there's nowhere to pull it to in the other platform. And so you have to think about things like that. You have to think about, you probably can't migrate the passwords across because they're encrypted, and so you can't move that across. So you might have to ask everyone to reset their passwords when you have a new platform. What do you do when there's like characters that aren't accepted in like one platform and not another, especially when it comes to people's names or places or those kind of things? Not every country uses the same alphabet as what we do, and there are all these like issues that until you actually get into the weeds, you're like, wow, we got to make some decisions here, and whatever we do, someone's going to get annoyed. And so I think there's a very good question that Todd's asking, like, how much do you have to migrate? Like what would happen if you don't migrate all of it? What would happen if you migrate only like the names or the usernames or just the discussions? Because I feel like this idea you've got to migrate everything causes a lot of stress. And I think it's a lot easier to figure out what's critical and what's not. And the non-critical stuff probably doesn't matter that much. Yeah, and so I agree with Todd. Like getting into the weeds, I think is really, really important. You can probably do away with a lot of the old stuff. You can probably not migrate a lot of the content that isn't getting any activity. I also feel migration, and I don't know about you, Todd, but we get a fair amount of work from clients that like, okay, we're about to begin a migration, but we want to do our strategy as well, because this is the time, if you're going to do a big reset, let's get everything right. And so we often get situations like that where they're like, in 6 months time, we're going to do a migration, but let's get our strategy sorted first. Let's actually iron out all the things, get the change management behind that in place. And so I think there's all that. And then there's also how you communicate it to your members, and not overreacting to the negative feedback you're going to get on the first day. Like any feedback that you get on the first day is probably going to be negative. It's like walking into a supermarket that's reorganized. You don't know where everything is anymore, and that's annoying. It might be better, but it's annoying because you don't recognize it. So yeah, those are some things we think about. And also just the team behind it is key. Like when we've done this recently, you need a team that meets often, understands the whole process. You need a project manager in place that's really going to drive this, or it doesn't happen the way you want it to. Yeah, Todd, I don't know if you want to jump in here again.
Yeah, no, amen to that. I was going to bring up that member, bringing the members along for the ride is so critically important, and having a change management plan to communicate that to them. Better yet, having some kind of advisory group of consisting of both new and old users, within the platform, to help sort of lay out and say, like, these are the changes we're going to make. And it's not a matter of saying like, hey, what would you like to see in the next version of the platform? It's better to kind of guide them a little bit to set expectations so that you're not opening yourself up to all kinds of odd changes. I don't know if from our viewers, if you've ever watched any of the old Simpsons, where Homer got to design a vehicle and just like put everything in that he ever wanted to see in the vehicle, and it becomes this Frankenstein's monster of a car. You don't want to set yourself up for those kinds of situations. And so framing the conversation, saying like, we're going to be making some changes to the platform, these are some of the features we're looking at, give us your feedback on those features. Not necessarily asking for like everything under the moon, for those changes, but really kind of like, I do think it's key to consider those members as partners in the process of making that migration happen. Because if you're not bringing them along, as Richard said, like there are going to be negative reactions. And now I'll pull down a movie reference. If you've ever watched Wayne's World, definitely an older movie, but at one point they do like a pan of the camera into Wayne and Garth, and they say, "We fear change." That's like every member I've ever run into. Like nobody likes change. It's upsetting. It kind of pulls the world out from under me. And if particularly for people that have some level of attachment to that community platform, you got to treat them with kid gloves, to a certain extent, but not overreact to the things that they say, because they'll get used to it and come around.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe that first reaction after seeing something different is like, I used to find that particular thing here, it's not there. So that's like the main reaction, what we have seen when we are revamping the community. So we try to keep in mind that when we are doing so, we keep the things very much close to the place where they used to find it earlier. So I think so we are coming to close to ending of this session. And just quickly, we'll pick up the last question, and just a quick thought on that. And I think so we only are left with 5 minutes. So the last question is, how can I ensure the security and data privacy of my community members when choosing a community platform? So the data privacy and security for my community members.
So almost I think all of the major enterprise platforms now will be ISO 27001 certified and probably SOC 2 compliant as well. So those are two gold standard certificates that highlight whether they have a good information security system in place, or whether that's being tested and passed the test or not. So those are the two simplest things you can look at. I mean, this is a topic that goes way beyond my level of expertise, but at the surface level, I think if you're at a major company today, they're going to ask for those certificates, and if they don't have it, there's a whole set of questions they have to go through to answer. So that's probably the simplest way of thinking about the time we have left on this call.
Yeah, and I'll say that this is probably above my pay grade as well. I mean, you would want somebody who's a security professional to be able to evaluate those things. Some organizations, if they've got personally identifiable data and they're in a highly regulated industry and they need to be tracking those things, you need to be asking those questions about the platform providers, so that they can offer answers or interface with somebody from your organization or team that evaluates those kinds of things. But even at a lightweight level, are you going to allow anonymity within the community, where you allow people to have screen names rather than to have spelled out names? And there's definitely implications for that in the space as well. Like Richard said, there are a lot of questions to be considered around that. The ISO certs and SOC 2 that he mentioned, are kind of table stakes for that world. And I think for anybody that's interested in diving a little deeper, talk to your security analyst, your IT security team, and see if there's some other concerns in place.
I do think, if you don't mind me just jumping in here quickly, because I think there's a bigger question here, which maybe we don't have time to get fully into, which is, there used to be a trend in communities where you would collect as much data as useful from members because it might be interesting at some point. Because data back then was an asset, and I think it's like the quote that everyone says now, data is not the new oil, it's the new uranium, where it's like, it's expensive, it's difficult to dispose of, and there's lots of regulations around it. And so I think I would think very carefully, what data do you 100% need? And also, how long are you going to retain it for? A lot of people have members that haven't been active in their community for a decade, Do you need to retain the data on those members? Because a best practice that is becoming increasingly important is getting rid of data that isn't relevant anymore. So if there is a data breach, it's not as severe as it would be, as if all the data was just sitting there. So I do think that the other thing I would add is exploring data. You shouldn't have unencrypted CSV files anymore on your hard drive. You just shouldn't. It's like an accident waiting to happen. And so I would start thinking about what are best practices in data, in measurement, in compliance, because these things, they're one of the biggest trends at the moment. They don't get anywhere near enough attention as what they should.
Okay, so there were great insights on migration, on the community branding, loyalty, and all that stuff. And thank you so much, Todd and Richard, for giving your valuable time. And thank you, attendees, for joining in. It was really, really pleasure talking to you. And thank you all. And just before we wrap up, I'm thrilled to announce that we have a virtual conference, Community Refocus 2023, that would be on 15th of November, 2023. Stay tuned for more information on LinkedIn, getting more details on that, and see you soon. Thank you everyone for joining in.